How's everyone doing? This video goes with your 3B2, your Egypt notes. So here we go. Remember, at any time during these videos, if I'm moving too fast for whatever you guys are writing or trying to record, you can always pause the video to finish recording notes, or you can always actually scoot backwards. The beauty of YouTube, guys. Alright, here we go. Egypt. Alright. Egypt is located on the Lower Nile River, near the Delta and the Mediterranean Sea. So the Lower Nile River, remember the Nile is upside down, so we got the lower here, the upper is to the south. And the reason it is that way, guys, is remember it's higher elevation in Upper Egypt and it flows down into the lower elevation. Now let's remember also that a delta is, instead of the river just dumping straight into the ocean, or in this case the Mediterranean Sea, as it gets closer to the water, it branches off into all these little smaller tributaries. That's the delta. Now, as far as flooding is concerned, the Nile floods very regularly at about the same time every year, so you can actually set a calendar around it, which makes it very convenient. You can plan your farming schedule around it. Also, when the Nile would recede back to its normal banks, it would leave behind a black layer of mud that was called silt. Now, this was extremely rich in nutrients and would help replenish the soil after farming and made it very, very, very good farmland. And as far as natural protection is concerned, the neighboring deserts, obviously the Sahara off to the west, and then the deserts up here on the Sinai Peninsula to the east, and the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, offer a lot of protection. The one thing that the deserts do as a negative, though, is they limit the ability of people to spread very far away from the Nile. As you can see, look at all these minor towns and cities along the Nile River in ancient Egypt. Note that none of them are very far from the Nile River. They're all pretty close. That's because once you got too far away from the Nile, where the floodwaters wouldn't affect the soil, it was essentially desert, right up to the river. Alright, innovations. The Egyptians developed an early form of paper, which is known of papyrus, as papyrus. It's made of reeds gotten wet and mashed together. They also developed their own form of hieroglyphics, their form of writing that is known as hieroglyphics. And you can see that here. They're able to write this on paper, so unlike the Mesopotamians, they're not forced to always carve it into stone. They choose to sometimes, but they don't have to. Social structure and government. Egypt's government was known as a theocracy. Whenever you see the word C-R-A-C-Y, cracy, that usually means it's some kind of government. Democracy, theocracy, aristocracy. All of those are different types of government. Now, a theocracy is a theological government. And when we say the word theological, we're usually referring to religion. And so what that would mean is that government's power is based on the religious authority of the rulers. In this case, the ruler was known as Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was believed to be a god on earth. And the Egyptians were polytheistic. Again, this means they had belief in many, many gods. They had a pantheon of gods, sun god, god of the underworld, very much like the Greeks. They also were very ardent believers in the afterlife, and they mummified and buried the dead, their elite dead, with things that they could use in that afterlife. So they believed that when you died, you would pass on to the next world, to the afterlife, and that anything that you were buried with would go with you. So the rich would be buried with their prized possessions so that they could have them in their next life. They also had a very strict social structure in which slavery was practiced. Here's an example of some of the things that were buried with King Tut, obviously that rich sarcophagus, but then if you look at all of these things that were buried with him, they found Egyptian tombs with whole boats buried with them, again for the same reason. And that'll be a wrap on your Egypt notes, guys.